Remember, on Rosh Hashanah, I spent a fair amount of time talking about Yaakov crossing the river Yabok and the midrash that he made himself into a bridge, right? And we went through all the different ways of imagining what that might have looked like, what making himself into a bridge might mean, that he was standing in the middle of the water and moving things, that he reached across the whole river, that he sensitized himself to what people needed and bringing everyone across. So here's a completely, totally different take. By the Khatam Sofer, who is a prominent European rabbi, a champion of orthodoxy, 1762 to 1839. And what he said is, there was actually a bridge there already. There was a bridge right there over the river, but he didn't want to use it. So he made himself into a bridge instead. Why didn't he want to use the bridge? Because of a whole long discussion in the Talmud, it's in Masechet Bava Kama, and in the subsequent law codes, about robbery and stolen property. So, a Jew, according to Jewish law, is not supposed to in any way use or benefit from stolen property. And it turns out that this was a big problem with bridges. Because apparently at the time of the Talmud, they tended to be made from palm trees that were cut from private property without the owner's permission. Private citizens would do it, and the government would do it, right? The king would decide we need a bridge, so, and very often part of the problem was the king would say, I want you to take this number of trees from each of all these different people's fields. And the king's agents, the local authorities, would go out and they just cut all the trees from one field. It's easier, right? So a Jew is not supposed to cross a bridge built of stolen trees. And because most of them are, presumptively, you don't cross bridges unless you know for sure. And the Khatam Sofer says that Jacob, in the wonderful way that Torah commentary has no sense of time and doesn't care, right? Jacob, the patriarch in the Bible, was totally familiar with this whole Talmudic discussion and all of the law codes that followed. And he knew all this, that you're not supposed to cross bridges because they are most likely made from stolen trees, and Jacob is not crossing this bridge. So what's he going to do? So he made himself into a bridge instead. All right? Now, before I go further into Jacob and the, right, note the Talmud's systemic thinking here and how aware they are of structural injustice. The notion of structural injustice, whether we're talking economic or racial or legal or patriarchy or whatever it is, this is not some new woke invention, right? This is the way the Talmud thought, totally. You shouldn't create public goods through unjust systems. Anything that's effectively theft or inequality, right? When the burden is supposed to be shared by everyone and it falls only on particular individuals or the groups, the Talmud says that's basically theft. And not only that, but you shouldn't contribute to or participate in systemic injustice by benefiting from any of its fruits. Don't cross the bridge. That's a pretty far-reaching teaching. Think about the implications for us as we look at our world, right? Look at our society. Who built our physical infrastructure? Right? Who does our economic system rest on? Right? I think of Heschel, famously, watching his mother candle an egg, right? You hold it up to the flame to see if there are blood spots, because if there's blood spots in the egg, then you can't, it's not kosher. So he watched his mother do that and famously said that would that we inspected our dollars for blood spots with the same care as we inspect our eggs, right? It reminds me also, you think about the systemic, David Hartman, years ago, Alav HaShalom, Zichrono Livracha, in Israel. David Hartman had a very sharp critique of far-right visions of Judaism, where the burden of sustaining public goods had to fall on other people, right? Not the people spending all day studying Torah. And he said, if you have a system, a religious system, where to be a good Jew, right, requires all these people who either aren't good Jews or aren't Jews to do all the stuff like ambulances and serving in the army and all the other things that a society depends on, something is wrong with that system. It's screwed up. That's not what Judaism was supposed to be, right? He said that years ago, how prescient he was. And by the way, it applies to synagogues too. I saw a Chabad TikTok video right before Yom Kippur. It was cute, told a joke. And then it said, you shouldn't have to pay to pray. Right, that's the big thing. Like, we do it free, come to thy holidays free, right? They're very big on that. And I want to say, it is doing a tremendous disservice to the Jewish people to do that. Right? It's not good. First of all, because it's dishonest. Right? On the one hand, should limited resources ever be a barrier to participation? Absolutely not. That's our policy too, right? No one ever should be excluded from prayer because they cannot pray. But to say that you shouldn't have to pay to pray, prayer is free, of course, right? But buildings and books and clergy and cameras and microphones for Zoom are not free. So to say you shouldn't have to pay to pray means someone else other than you should pay for it. Right? That's what they're saying. And so Chabad is creating this expectation. I want the bridge to be there when I happen to feel like crossing. So go and build it from someone else's trees. Right? And that is not how the rabbis envisioned a Jewish society functioning, because they understood that that is not good for the society and it's not good for the individual soul. We are supposed to be all contributing to the things that we as a community need. And by the way, it doesn't matter if there are very few very wealthy donors who can afford to underwrite the whole thing and want to, right? Jewish communal goods are supposed to be supported by everyone. The king says, take one tree from all these different people. If the king's agents say, nah, it's easier to just raise money from a couple big donors, that's a form of theft, right? And it's actually stealing even from the people who should be contributing and aren't being taught that that's what they're supposed to do. It's not good. Okay, so back to Jacob and the bridge that he won't cross and what this has to do with Yom Kippur. You shouldn't cross a physical bridge that is built unjustly. And guess what? You shouldn't cross a metaphoric bridge built unjustly either. We want and need bridges in our divided, polarized, tumultuous world. We want and need bridges in our friendships and our families and our offices and our kids' schools. We want things back to normal. We want to be forgiven already. We want to repair the rents in the fabric of society. We're so tired of the anger and the fighting and the vitriol. right? We want our friend back. We want to heal the rupture in our relationship to planet Earth. We want a functional government. We want peace at home, at work, in the world around us. Of course we do. We want and need the bridges built. But a lot of us, and I think some of us a little bit, most of us sometimes, we'd also like most of the cost to be borne by other people. Let other people sacrifice their money, their lifestyle, their time, their labor, their right to justice, their right to be heard and known and valued, their emotional work. It's true in our society and at home. When your family, quote, comes together, is someone bearing more than their fair share of the cost of the nice family portrait of reconciliation and peace? Is someone being less than who they fully are, keeping their hurts and their true selves quiet? The bridges we build, the apologies, the restitution, the reconciliation, the moving on, have to be built justly and honestly. We're crossing a bridge built from stolen trees. Whenever the physical or emotional burdens of forgiveness or understanding fall on the wrong people, or on only some of the right people, or when we ourselves don't contribute our fair share. So the question is, what are we willing to do? To give up? What's our share of the burdens and the costs of forgiving, of understanding, of making restitution and repair, of being vulnerable, of changing? Or are we hoping they'll really only fall on the other people? A few examples. Here's one. We want to heal our relationship with the planet Earth. Terrific. That's good. Who pays the cost of that? And what do we do? Are you willing to fly less often? Or, here's a big one out here, right? One good thing out here is you have to pay for garbage pickup. That's good, because if you don't pay for it, you have to go to the dump. You go to the dump, you see, like, oh my, like the level of trash that we produce, it's astonishing, right? So we go to the dump and we take all our Amazon boxes and we pack them up and we put them in the dump and we feel so terrific, right? I'm recycling. It's great, right? Did you know that the positive impact on recycling on the ecosystem, the impact of all of that wonderfulness that we feel so good about, is minuscule compared to, guess what? Giving up our lawns. Lawns. You drive around out here, you look at these lawns. The water, the chemicals, the lawnmowers, the leaf blowers, and the damage that we are doing to the ecosystem in the soil underneath those lawns is enormous. It turns out that one household giving up their lawn and instead planting native species that don't require all of that maintenance, all the chemicals and all the water and all that stuff that just grow in this amazing planet that we have right here, and that replenish the ecosystem with mulching, does exponentially more to repair the ecosystem than a whole year of recycling. So are we willing to give up our lawns? It's much easier to make a donation to SOFO, right? The nature preserve out here. You go to their benefits, right? We go to a lot of benefits out here. And you look around and you wonder how many people at the SOFO benefit flew out here on a private plane or helicopter. Here are some more examples. Accusations of divisiveness when an individual or group insists that genuine issues be seen and addressed. You should forego your right to justice, restitution, apology, because I'm tired of hearing about it. Or just ignoring people and their hurts because we're ready to move on. Many segments of the Jewish community have been terrible about this with COVID. The ableism in the Jewish community in dealing with COVID. How many synagogues last year from the Bima, rabbis saying, it's so great that we're all back together. We are not all back together. Because the world is still unsafe for a lot of people. And a lot of synagogues and Jewish organizations are not willing to do what needs to do to include all of us, because we are ready to move on. Banning books and curriculum because they might make some kids feel bad. People of color should get over racism without white kids ever even having to just feel sad or embarrassed by the truth of our country's history. And our relative passivity, think about Americans in the face of threats to democracy, especially when you compare us to Israel. We say we care about everybody voting, that this is a democracy, that it matters. What are we doing about it? What are we sacrificing for it? And of course, it's not just in the public sphere, right? In our personal lives. See if this sounds familiar. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have lost my temper. I shouldn't have lost my patience, or I'm so sorry I gave you a hard time. I'm sorry I missed that thing that was really important to you, whatever it is. Sounds good. And then it happens to be accompanied by an inner monologue, or sometimes even said out loud. But you know, it just makes me crazy when you da-da-da-da-da, or I just get so frustrated because you, or, you know, if you reminded me, I would have, right? Even in the moment of an apology, we're sort of hoping that the other person will make the necessary adjustments, not us. I'm really, really sorry. And if you'll change, I'll do better. Other bridges built with stolen trees. Purporting to forgive a sin committed against someone else. We had a really rich discussion about this on Slichot, of Wiesenflowers, the sunflower that I mentioned last night. Or pressuring someone to forgive when there's been inadequate tshuva or none at all. This is one of the problems of the language and the liturgy of Yom Kippur. And it's especially problematic for those of us who are raised to bracket our needs so that everybody else feels better, the peacemakers among us, right? Who are taught to always say, I'm sorry. There's a gender component to that, but it's not only that, right? We can do damage when we pressure people to say, I'm sorry, and to forgive when there's been no real apology or they're not ready. We want to move on. We want to get back to normal, have less turbulence and tension, or we don't want to feel guilty anymore, or we miss the relationship we used to have, and we can't stand the distance we've created. We're tired of hearing about it, or we're conflict averse, and we want peace. Those are fabulous reasons to forgive harm that someone did to you. They're not great reasons to pressure someone else to forgive, whether you're the one who hurt them or they were hurt by someone else, whether it's an individual or a group. Or maybe we offer an inadequate or an incomplete apology and we expect forgiveness anyway. We put the burden on the other person to forgo what they really need and just accept what we are offering. There's a fabulous book on apologies by Aaron Lazar, who's a professor of psychiatry, whose specialty is apologies. And he identifies in his book 7 psychological needs of an offended party that a person might have when they're hurt, and which an apology might meet. And he writes that these needs are applicable, not all of them all the time, but may be applicable for all kinds of wrongdoing, right? From little sharp elbow slights to the torture of prisoners. So here are the 7. 1, restoration of self-respect and dignity. 2, the assurance that both parties have shared values. 3, the assurance that the offenses weren't the victim's fault. 4, the assurance of safety in their relationships. 5, seeing the offender suffer, even if it's just the embarrassment of having to admit the wrong. 6, reparation for the harm caused by the offense. And 7, having meaningful dialogue with the offender, actual conversation about what happened. As I said, all of these don't apply in every case, but think about what you've needed at various times in your life from apologies when you've been wronged. How often did you really get what you needed? And did you feel pressure to get over it regardless? And how did that feel? Now think about when you've apologized, when you've needed to make amends. How much effort and time did you put into really figuring out what the other person needed? And did you give it to them? Were you focused really on their need or on your need to be forgiven? The worst example of these is usually the public apologies, which meet almost none of the needs, except the person who wants to be back in good public graces. Lazar identifies in this regard also the issue of power in connection with apologies. When we hurt someone, we do something wrong, we rob them of a little bit of their power. And he says that real apology involves giving it back and adding some of your own, right? It's on the model of restitution in Jewish law. When you make restitution in Jewish law, you give back the amount that you took and you add a fifth, which is really 25%, right? Similarly, here, are you willing, when you apologize, to compromise your own dignity, to be vulnerable, to cede some of your power, whether it's the upper hand on the higher ground, or simply to really recognize that the power of forgiveness sits entirely in the offended party? The essence of the bridge made from stolen trees is looking for cheap grace, chesed without justice, trying to make nice without the hard work of making amends, without personal cost. I included a poem in the yellow handout by Donna Kate Russian. It's from a collection called This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color. It's called The Bridge Poem. I've had enough. I'm sick of seeing and touching both sides of things, sick of being the damn bridge for everybody. Nobody can talk to anybody without me, right? I explain my mother to my father to my little sister to my brother to the white feminists to the black church folks to the ex-hippies to the black separatists to the artists to my friend's parents. Then I've got to explain myself to everybody. I do more translating than the goddamn UN. Forget it. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of filling in your gaps, sick of being your insurance against the isolation of your self-imposed limitations, sick of being the crazy at your holiday dinners, sick of being the odd one at your Sunday brunches, sick of being the sole black friend to 34 individual white people. Find another connection to the rest of the world. Find something else to make you legitimate. Find some other way to be political and hip. I will not be the bridge to your womanhood, your manhood, your humanness. I'm sick of reminding you not to close off too tight for too long. I'm sick of mediating with your worst self on behalf of your better selves. I am sick of having to remind you to breathe before you suffocate your own full self. Forget it. Stretch or drown, evolve or die. The bridge I must be is the bridge to my own power. I must translate my own fears, mediate my own weaknesses. I must be the bridge to nowhere but my true self, and then I will be useful. Powerful poem. Obviously, the specific context of it is race, but it's by no means only about race. It's also about a form of compassion fatigue caused by people wanting to cross bridges built from stolen trees, which writ large is the failure to do the work to become a bridge person like Jacob did, as we talked about on Rosh Hashanah. To expand your capacity for understanding, empathy, communication. It's about the burden we are on others when we're too small to be bridge people ourselves because we haven't done the work. So all that work falls on other people, other groups, other people you love. Really, this is the better understanding of the ritual of the scapegoat in the Torah reading we just read. People think of scapegoating as blaming someone else for the problems. The actual ritual in the Torah has nothing to do with blame. It's not at all about whose fault anything is. It's all about who's going to bear the burden of everyone feeling and being okay after the fact. Who's going to do the work of fixing things, of bringing the peace of mind that comes with forgiveness and atonement? We put that on the goat. You bear the guilt, you bear our feelings, you bear it all, and we'll send you out of the camp. And in the realm and language of sacred ritual, that's okay, right? There's a role, there's even a need for a goat like that. But it applies after you do all the work, after you build the bridge and become the bridge, and after you have the courage to cross. The ritual then can then help you feel, yes, I've changed. I've crossed some boundary. I'm no longer the person who did that. I'm no longer guilty, and I can take the burden off my shoulders and put it over there, right? In the no man's land on the goat. But only in the ritual and reenactment after the fact. It's not a substitute for the work itself. So when I told you at the beginning about the Torah's prohibition on crossing bridges, right, because they might be built from stolen trees, I didn't actually convey to you the full discussion in the Talmud. The rabbis were not naive. They knew that, yes, bridges are usually made of stolen palm trees, and they also know it's not totally workable to never cross a bridge. And they looked around the world and they said, you know, the Jews are crossing the bridges. We can't really realistically keep them from doing that. So they bring this notion, right? It's a notion well-known phrase in Talmudic discourse called Dina de Malkuta Dina. It means the law of the land is the law. It means when there's a tension between Jewish law and civil law, you don't override the law, you follow the law. And so if the king is permitting the trees to be taken, then technically, really, even though from our perspective it's stolen, the government allows it, and so Dina de Malkuta Dina, we can cross the bridge, right? That's the logic. What they're really saying is, look, we do the best we can, and we live in the real world, right? We can't isolate ourselves totally, and ideally, all the creation of public goods would be shared, and ideally, nothing would be built from injustice, and ideally, we wouldn't participate in anything that is, but as a practical matter, that's just not possible. We wouldn't go to the grocery store if we held ourselves to that standard. It is not possible, right? The same with emotional labor. Ideally, it would fall on the right people to do all the emotional work. The reality is, if we wait for other people to bear their fair share in building bridges that we need, we would be waiting a very long time, right? And most of us, at some point, are going to end up crossing emotional, physical bridges built of stolen trees. We know that. Talmud says, all right, so don't let perfection get in the way of doing better, and at least make sure you're aware of the issue. Turns out, according to our friend, the Khatam Sofer, Jacob knew all this too. He knew the problem, he knew there was a loophole, and he said, the righteous hold themselves to a higher standard. I know that technically I can justify crossing this bridge, but I'm not taking advantage of the government permits, everyone does it, we do the best we can. No, I'm not going to cross that bridge. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to become a bridge myself. All right. Maybe we can't all be tzaddikim. We're not all the righteous of the righteous, and we don't have to be perfect. But I do think we can all do a little better.